So welcome to anybody who's looking on catch-up as well. So we're talking about prayer this morning, and I've entitled the talk Prayer Life with God, because I think that's what it is really. And as what we are as in this series is thinking about being apprentices to Jesus and learning to do the things that he did, learning to be like him and learning to live with him. That's what we're wanting to almost direct our lives around. Those three things. And I guess prayer obviously is one of those that's the most important. It was clearly something that was the life of Jesus himself in all that he did and in his ministry, and it's so often recorded in the Gospels about him praying. And here's a couple. Luke 5, yet the news about him spread all the more. This is when he was really becoming famous, his ministry was taking off. So the crowds of people came to hear him and to be healed of their sicknesses. But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed. And then, just another verse from Luke 6. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. That's a different meaning altogether for an all-nighter. I've never done that, I have to admit. But Jesus, clearly his life was connected to the Father. He talked about his ministry doing what he saw the Father doing, and it all comes from this relationship that he has through prayer. So as apprentices to Jesus, it is really important that we learn how to pray. And just to become more, and it's not easy, it's hard, it's a hard thing to do. I was thinking about what comes to mind when I talk about, just even mention the word prayer. For many of us, it probably is that it is hard, and not many of us would probably say that as a practice prayer we're really killing it. We've got it nailed, and it's just wonderful all the time. It's wonderful. For me, sometimes it just seems to connect, and it almost, what you might say, works well. But other times it is just hard, and I think I'm just distracted and I'm getting nowhere and all the rest of it. So we might think it's really hard. The boredom might come to mind, when we've got so much to distract us, and there's another series on Netflix we could watch, or there's another box set we could binge on. Somehow prayer seems to be a bit, there's so much better stuff I could be doing, more interesting, more entertaining. It's boring, and maybe because of both of those, hard and boring, we feel guilty a lot of the time about prayer. I want to try and free us from all of those things if I can. I'm sure John Mark Comer will do much better at it than me. But anyway, it is hard. And I think probably it's harder for us in this cultural time in the West than it maybe has been for a lot of history. And here are some reasons, cultural barriers to prayer for us, just to understand these really. 3 T's: tech, time and tiredness. Tech, because the technology is trying to distract us all the time. We're the only generation that I can't remember mobile phones in my youth. I mean, some of you won't believe that. I can't even remember computers in my youth, but it's true. And tech has become, the fact we've got the phone there all the time, and we've got so many different ways in which we can connect to different things and be entertained and all the rest of it. And it's about distraction. And actually that's what our phones particularly are trying to do. The experts talk about the fact that there's an attention economy. And the phone is trying to grab your attention, it's trying to addict you, it's trying to draw you in all the time. Have another look at another funny video on YouTube or whatever it is. Somebody once said, do you remember those times? Those of us who are older, you remember the times when we used to be bored sometimes, You'd be waiting in a queue of somewhere or doing something, you got no phone, so you were just waiting. And those were moments when you could, oh yeah, God, yeah. But now the phone is there, it's all the rest of it. I know I'm a bit of a Luddite and I'm always going on about it, but the technological revolution of phones and computers has had a profound impact on us, on our society, and we shouldn't minimise it. And all of that leads to the time thing. We are so hurried in our world. Tech was supposed to help us actually, but it seems to have just made us more available to people, more online all the time, working longer hours and all the rest of it. And time is a big hindrance to our prayer life. and also that thing of tiredness. Because of all of that put together, we are just a generation that's tired. Because we're trying to do too much, we're trying to stay connected with too many people, or working too much. And that's where all these link in with Sabbath and all the rest of it. But we are just so tired. And you know how it is. If you're tired, how easy is it to pray? It just isn't. You either fall asleep or you get distracted or whatever. And I know, I'm there all the time. So those 3 T's are a big cultural hindrance to our prayer lives. Wealth. We, in the West, we live like kings would have lived in, only a few generations ago. We have so much, really. I know that the financial crisis and all the rest of it, and cost of living crisis, and I get that. But nevertheless, we are really, really wealthy. And we're not driven to prayer in the same way that previous generations were. That prayer in the Lord's Prayer, give us our daily bread. Why do I need to pray that? I mean, my cupboards are full of food, Where's the relevance of that kind of prayer anymore? And so, wealth, we don't have that kind of drive into prayer that previous generations did, because they didn't know where the next meal was coming from. And they relied much more on God's providence and understood that. I mean, we still do, actually, but we're just so one step removed from it, we don't understand sometimes. So wealth, independence. In the West, our cultural time, we prize independence so much. The ability to be able to be self-sufficient and a self-made man, and to be able to cope and to do life well. All of that is seen as a real thing to be prized. So prayer is a lot about dependence. And it's about realising that actually we can't live well independently. And yet our culture says, that's what you should push for, that's your goal, that you've got everything sorted, your life's good, and it's you do it. So independence, we breathe all of this into our culture. And just the whole thing of secularism. Our world is so secular, doesn't believe in God or spirituality, or much of it doesn't. It's a barrier that we have to cross, because when we're trying to pray, we're tapping into a whole new realm that isn't the realm of what we can see and touch and feel and science and all the rest of it. It's a supernatural thing, prayer. But we know as Christians that realm is real to us, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But secularism is a great barrier to us, I think, in just that whole idea of prayer and connecting and communicating with the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So that's some of the barriers to prayer. And I think it has pervaded the church. A lot of this stuff does. It pervades my life, I've got to be honest, and I have to fight it. We're in a battle. For our attention, for our beliefs, and for our identity. And so we have to fight it. But that's our cultural moment. So prayer is not easy in our cultural time. That's just a definition of prayer. It's talking with God, or life with God. And that's really what prayer is all about, and that's the goal of prayer. That was the goal of Jesus' prayer, I believe, that he just enjoyed being in God's presence. That's why, for him, to spend the night in prayer was just a delight, because he was so connected with the Father, and it was so delightful for him that it was an easy thing for him. And now we're not there, I'm not there, but that's where we want to get to. It is life with God. The goal is relationship. And I said last time, I think, that all of these practices, but particularly prayer, is something which is both unnatural for us and natural. And what I mean by that is that it's become unnatural for us because we became disconnected with God through the fall. But actually we were created to do this. It's natural in the sense that God made us with a capacity within us to relate to him as Father. But that was all broken as part of the fall in Genesis 1. And so it's become unnatural to us. But we have now the Holy Spirit given to us. And that's what enables that reconnection to happen. That through the Holy Spirit we can then begin to make that connection and relationship and all the rest of it. Now, you know that in our own relationships, conversation is an art form, isn't it? You have to learn to do it. You have to give time to do it. Whatever relationship you're thinking of, it only happens. And I was thinking actually back that during lockdown, I lost some of that art actually of conversation. Just the type of conversation you have over a meal and all the rest of it. When we came out of lockdown, I almost had to start relearning what it meant to connect with people. I don't know that only you felt that, but maybe it's just me. But there was that sense of, I've forgotten how to do this. I've forgotten how to be face to face with people. You know, there's the communication over Zoom and all the rest of it is very limited. And for those months when we were disconnected, we lost. Well, I lost a bit of that art. And so it is something we learn to do. Just as I had to relearn really what it meant to relate to my family and those around us. So it's an art form. Now, I just want to focus on some building blocks that come from Jesus' great teaching about prayer in the Lord's Prayer. It's interesting that the only time, as far as I know, in the Gospels that the disciples, his first apprentices, ever asked him to teach them something was prayer. You know, interesting, he never taught, he asked them, teach us how to heal, or teach us how to cast out demons. He never asked them that. He never asked Jesus that. The only time is you see it in not actually this Matthew one, but the Luke passage where the Lord's Prayer is also a slightly shorter version. He gives them this teaching in response to that request. Lord, as John's disciples taught them how to pray, Lord, teach us how to pray. And I guess there was something obviously about his prayer life and the dynamic of prayer that Jesus had, which was revolutionary to them. And I think that they probably twigged that there was something about the prayer that drove everything else. You know, the healing, the casting out of demons, the teaching, the gifted teaching. It all came from this relationship he had with the Father and the prayer life. That's where all the hidden secret was. And so this is my reading of it anyway, is that they said, teach us how to pray, because we realise that everything else follows from that. Everything else comes from it. So let's read this passage, Matthew 6. You'll know this. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. So I want to, this morning, as for the rest of the time, is just to lay down 4 building blocks, I think, which are key to prayer life, and that come from this. And not so much the asking stuff, but the bit before the asking, okay? So we'll talk a bit more about the asking stuff next time. But I think there are 4 foundations which he gives us, which we need to have in place before prayer becomes something that we can actually work at and get better at. And the first foundation, I think, is this wonderful foundation that God is our Father. You know, he said this wonderful thing, you know, when you pray, say, Abba, Father. And I think without that first foundation, then prayer is something which will never be very attractive to us. And it's almost like the make or break of prayer, really, that you know that God is your Father. Now, we all have all sorts of false images of God and misunderstanding. None of us understand God properly, of course. And it's been said, I think, that God made man in his image, and we've done the compliment in reverse. So we often make God in our image. Now, there's all sorts of ways in which you can think of God. You might think of him as a bit of a pedantic teacher, you know, who's always longing to catch you out and say, no, you got that wrong. You made a mess of that. Or you think he's like a bit of a grumpy old man. Or someone who's a bit absent, you know, he's not really very close. Certainly not somebody maybe who you want to spend much time with, or he wants to spend much time with us. Maybe, you know, you focus on the judge element. But Jesus says, when you pray, say, and I think when he says when you pray, say, he's saying when you pray, think this. This is what you need to have in your mind. God is your Father. And I know for some of us, that isn't also a helpful image. The trouble is with trying to describe God in the Bible is that you always have to use human language and human illustrations, and they're always limited in that sense. So for us, I know that for many of us, our father relationship may have not been great. And so that to think of God as Father in that way is hard. But we need to sort of try and get beyond our own personal experiences and think of fatherhood in terms of how we know it should be. And I think a lot of us do have that sense, even if it's not our own experience in life, but we have this sense of what a good father should be like. Now, I'm a dad to 3 sons, all grown up. I said I was disappointed. I was very disturbed this year, but my eldest son became 40. I think, how can that possibly be? But anyway, he is. It's actually my middle son's birthday today. He's 38. Scary, really, that they're getting so old. But anyway, what the relationship I have with them is special. They're special to me, and I'm really proud of them. I'm proud of the lives they've built, the marriages that they have, who they are. And whenever they're in trouble, and sometimes they are, even now, as dad, I lay aside other things in order to go and help them. Whether it's a relational crisis or where the bank of dad needs to help again. Whatever it is, they're special to me. And nothing will ever change that. And that's the kind of image we need to have when we come to prayer. That's how our Father, even in a much, much bigger and better way than me with my kids, he is with us. He cares about us. He loves us. He delights in us. He loves to be with us. As I said last time, the whole guilt thing about prayer is that, we sometimes feel very guilty when after 3 minutes we've fallen asleep or we've become distracted. But I want to say to you that, as I said to you last time, our Father loves to be with his children so much that even those 3 minutes are a delight to him. It's flipping that thinking to thinking, so many of his children don't take any notice of him whatsoever. So if Dad gets 3 minutes of my time sometimes, then he's still pleased. I want it to be more. I want it to be more. I want it to develop. But if he just gets that, he's still pleased with us. So this is foundational to us. That if we want to have a good prayer life, we need to know God as our Father. Foundation 2 is that God is close. Because he says, when you pray, say, our Father in heaven. Now, I don't know what image comes to mind when you hear the word heaven. And again, this has been rather ruined by the church in the past, I think. But, often we think of some sort of cloud and somebody sitting on a cloud or an angel or something far away. We are weird. Well, I don't know what comes to mind for you, but anyway, there's all sorts of caricatures of what heaven is. But actually, the word that is used, that Jesus used there, is heavens. Really, it's our Father in the heavens. And in Jewish thinking, they would have understood this much more, because they saw heaven as not some distant place, but as a part of our realm, not a seen part, but as interacting. And literally in the Greek, the word actually means air. It's our Father who is in the air. And that, to me, brings a whole new dynamic to this, because it means that he's as close to me as the air around my body or the air inside my body. That's how close God is. He's present. So wherever you're doing your prayer, whether it's in your bedroom or your living room, your study, wherever it is, or you're just walking around, he's there. He's as close to you as the air that you're breathing and is surrounding you. And when we engage in prayer, we need to engage all of our senses, I think. And we've been given an imagination, and we've been given an imagination for a purpose. And part of that purpose is that we can use our imagination to imagine God with us. So when I pray, I try to imagine Jesus sitting right with me, or the Holy Spirit descending on me. And it actually does help. God is never absent, he's really close to us. And that is the second building block that is really important to us. If we do think God is somewhere distant, somewhere away, then we'll find it very hard to pray. And usually actually the problem is us. We just get distracted, or our disordered desires take over and we think, I'll watch a Netflix film, whatever it might be. But God is close. Foundation 3 is that God is to be enjoyed for who he is. And that's so important in prayer. It's just to get to this point where it's pleasant and a pleasure to be with him. And I think that's what that hallowed be your name is all about. Hallowed is not a word that we tend to use very often. I don't know how often you use it, but what it means is holy. And that also has difficult connotations for us sometimes. The word holy, what does that mean? It really means to be set apart. And we often think of that in a moral sense, and of course God is holy and pure in that moral sense. But it also has this idea of being set apart as special. So God is unique, he's special. And it's all about that sense of being beautiful and wonderful and true and a delight. And when Jesus says, when you pray, say, hallowed be your name, he's saying, come into relationship with him in that sense of delighting in him, in knowing that he's special, knowing that he's you. Also that relationship with as Father, but just to enjoy him and to be grateful to him and to know his beauty and his wonder. There is no one more beautiful in this world than the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And the great thing is we get to connect with all three as part of the Trinity. And I think it's really understanding that prayer isn't primarily about getting stuff and getting stuff answered. Not as it is about that, but it's not its main goal. It's not its prime goal. You imagine a relationship with somebody who is always just wanting something from you. When kids are young, that tends to be what they do. Dad, can you take me there? Can you get me this? Can you do this? But it's not a very healthy relationship, is it? If somebody's always asking you for another 100 quid all the time, that's the basis of the relationship. Oh, could you lend me another 100 quid? Could you give me this? Could you give me this? We soon get very tired of those kind of relationships. We think they're just users, really. This isn't a kind of relationship. But so often that's how we can see God, just in terms of what he can give us, And it's getting away from that. Prayer will never be something that's delightful if that's your sole purpose. Now, we do need to get stuff from God, obviously. Think about that next time. But it's not the primary purpose. It's realising the emotional source of my well-being is my relationship to him and how beautiful he is. Okay. You can see why we need 2 talks, because I'm near the end though, honest. The last building block, is that prayer makes a difference. He says, when you pray, say, your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Now when you analyse that's one of the phrases that has impacted my Christian life probably more than any other. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Why does he say pray that? He's saying that prayer changes reality. He's saying that prayer changes things. And so often we don't come to prayer in that sense, with that sense that actually my prayers matter. My prayers make a difference. But they do. In Christian life, we can too easily fall into sort of fatalism and think that, it's actually, what does it make? What difference does it make? God was going to do this anyway. No, he wasn't. Not necessarily. That's the whole point. That's why Jesus says, pray this prayer, because you can make a difference. And it's the ultimate, I think, beauty of our relationship with God, is that he has entrusted us with being able to change the reality of our world. Now that is an amazing thing, but it's true. Otherwise he would never have asked us to pray it. And we see this often played out. We can sometimes think that the future is just set in stone, but it isn't. It's more like Play-Doh. It can be just sort of twisted into other shapes by you and me in our prayer life. And God doesn't pretend to answer our prayer. I don't believe that. I don't believe he's just, you prayed it, but I was going to do that anyway. Prayer actually makes a difference. And we see that in lots of stories. There's an amazing story in 2 Kings chapter 20 with Hezekiah, King Hezekiah. And it says that in that chapter that he becomes ill, and he gets a visit from the prophet Isaiah. And Isaiah had this word from God, and he says, go to Hezekiah and say, get your house in order because you're going to die. You know, you think, thanks Isaiah, that's really helpful. I'm glad you told me that. But Hezekiah, and I don't believe that wasn't going to happen. I believe that it's a word from God, so it's going to happen. But Hezekiah turns his face to the wall, he starts crying, and he prays to God and asks God to heal him. And Isaiah's wandered off by this stage in the story, and he's got as far as the outer court or somewhere in the palace. And he gets this word from God and says, go back to Hezekiah and tell him I've heard his prayer, and he's going to be healed, and he's going to get 15 more years of life. Prayer made a difference. You see it with Moses, you see it in all sorts of ways. Now, I believe that the big picture of what God is doing is fixed, in the sense that we know he's going to win, and he's going to come back again, and heaven and all the rest of it, all those promises, they will happen, probably whether I pray or not. But even that, there's a weird thing in Peter where he says about hurrying the Lord's coming, speeding the Lord's coming. Even that seems to be somewhat contingent on the church. I don't understand all of that, but anyway, there it is. So prayer makes a difference. So I think these are 4 key building blocks to prayer. That until you know God as Father, you won't pray. If you think he's some kind of hard bloke who's trying to catch you out, who doesn't really like you very much, and almost, is forced to like you because of Jesus or whatever, I don't know, all sorts of weird ideas can spring around in our mind. You need to know that God is your Father, he loves you. Picture him as in the parable of the prodigal son, racing away to meet his son who's come back. That's always how God is. He races to meet us in his grace. If you think God's far away, not really listening, busy, preoccupied or something, then you won't pray. If you just want to get stuff from him, like some celestial slot machine, then you won't pray. Or it won't be a lasting kind of relationship. And if you don't think prayer really makes any difference, then why bother? But those 4 things, I think that Jesus actually starts the Lord's Prayer with were key because he knew they were key, and they're still key for us. So in closing, I just want to say that my hope is that we can, as we think about this spiritual practice, that we can get to the point where it does become slightly easier, that we don't feel guilty about it. That's not what it's about. That we can begin to delight in God and who he is and enjoy prayer, and to know that it does actually make a difference. And for us as a church to make a difference, I know we've been thinking more and more about the need to pray, and others have said this in the church as well. So we want to press into praying for who we are as a church, because it's only then that will make a difference. I think I'm done.